Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all today. I'm Savannah Sullivan, the Climate Policy Director at Green Umbrella. Thanks for joining today's event, Planning for Regional Climate Action. This is the 5th webinar in our Regional Climate Action Lunch and Learn series hosted by Green Umbrella. And today we're fortunate to be joined by the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments. And we'll be discussing the importance of planning to climate action and hear about some exciting programs and tools that have been implemented locally, as well as share some additional tools that you can use in your work now. We'll also share some opportunities to ask us questions at the end of this webinar, so feel free to stick around from 12:30 to 1 for an optional Q&A to ask our guests any questions. So just a brief overview, the Climate Policy Program at Green Umbrella works to foster coordination across our regional institutions on sustainability and policy, and elevate these needs to state, federal, and philanthropic opportunities to draw on resources. And we have 4 primary goals that you can see here for our work in the 10-county region. And today we're going to be focusing on goal number 4, building local government capacity. So in addition to these webinars, we are currently working through 2 sets of programming to tackle this goal. One is through our participation in the Urban Equity Climate Compact hosted by the Institute for Sustainable Communities, through which we're working to launch a regional climate collaborative, which will engage regional governments and organizations to design, launch, and implement critical climate actions. I'll share more about how you can get involved with that effort at the end of this presentation. We are also working to expand the Indiana University Environmental Resilience Institute's resilience cohort model into Ohio and Kentucky. And this model provides local governments with training and student fellows to implement climate actions every year in their jurisdictions. But today we are talking about planning. And so just wanted to provide a brief intro before I pass it off to our guests to emphasize the importance of the connection between planning, climate, and equity. And so as many of us have been talking about on these webinars to date, climate impact are already impacting communities across our country, and many local governments are on the front line of grappling with how to create solutions and developing climate, energy, adaptation, or resilience plans to better prepare and reduce long-term costs and protect resident safety, health, and livelihoods. And importantly, as we grapple with the effects of things like extreme heat, floods, landslides, poor air quality, and more, it's becoming increasingly crucial to embed and center equity in all phases of our planning and implementation. So before we jump into the programs from OK, I wanted to share quickly 3 tools that I recommend to you all to embrace and incorporate into your work. First is from the Georgetown Climate Center. They have an excellent equitable policy and legal toolkit. You can see the table of contents here. I think it's a great starter for introducing yourself into the different ideas and concepts for how planning and policy action connects to all of the different elements of what we can expect from climate change and how equity can be centered into not only our processes, but the outcomes, whether it's plans, codes, or actual projects themselves. This is a great place to get started. And these links will be included in the follow-up email to this webinar as well. I also wanted to highlight the Sustainable Development Code. This is a great tool for planners. It offers best practices for community development, and it has been developed with various law schools and practitioners across the country in several disciplines. There are 32 subchapters, a sample of which you can see here, that really dive in on different recommendations to amend development codes. And they are categorized as removing obstacles. So what in the existing code is harming your community, how to create incentives where we can look to and encourage developers, homeowners, and others to take action, and how to fill regulatory gaps. So what are the minimum standards your community will accept? So each of these recommendations then has a brief designed by and for public officials and staff, and it consists of 3 sections: an introduction, the effects of these types of codes, and some examples. You can pull up the code itself so you can begin incorporating into your jurisdiction. And there are also 2 to 3 examples of local governments that have adopted the recommendation, and the examples provided in plain language and involves not only the language itself, but citations for the ordinances, so you can adapt them yourselves. And last, I just wanted to call out a tool called the Community First Toolkit from the Highline Network. It is a toolkit that is specifically designed to help park organizations address inequities caused by infrastructural racism and shape public spaces that bring social, environmental, and economic benefits to our communities. But I really think it can be applied to any organization or any planning department, not just park efforts. A lot of the examples you can see here on the left are park oriented. You can click through a bunch of case studies. But this breakdown here on the right of how they organize their tools and some of the key themes of how it's important to think about climate and equity, you know, that first step of truly examining the history in your community. And they provide a lot of different approaches for you to take very concrete steps to adjust the way that you plan in your community to be equitable and climate centered. So with that, I am going to pass it off to OKI, and we are very fortunate to have both Andy Meyer and Margaret Minsner, who are going to share some excellent programs and toolkits that have been developed and implemented here locally as they pertain to energy and resilience. And so without further ado, I will pass it to Andy.
All right, thanks for inviting us, Savannah. Yeah, we are here to share a couple of ways that we're increasing local government's capacity to plan and adapt for climate change. Next slide, please. I'm Andy Meyer. I'm Senior Planner for Land Use, and my role is to engage with local governments around land use planning efforts and making sure that local land use planning efforts are done with a regional perspective and in concert with regional plans such as transportation and environmental concerns. And with me, Margaret Minsner, Senior Planner for Green Space, and she will be sharing a really cool tool that she developed a few months ago that allows users to identify the most appropriate and viable areas for environmental mitigation. Next slide, please. The program that I'm going to share today is our Community Energy Planning Program. It's a project that we wrapped up in 2020, at the end of 2020. It was a 3-year project where we engaged with local communities to develop individual community energy plans. Next slide, please. We did this in partnership with the Greater Cincinnati Energy Alliance. We're experts on community engagement and planning and working with local governments, but we're not experts on the technical aspects of energy, and that's where the Energy Alliance's expertise was vital to the project. And also we had a partnership with Duke Energy. Funding came through Duke Energy, and as well as certain data was vital to the effort from Duke. So we were glad to have them as a project partner. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we worked with local governments to produce these plans. You see on the screen the 8 local governments that we worked with. This was, we held an application, a round of applications to select the 8 communities, and we selected them based on trying to get a mix of large cities, small communities, both rural and urban. So we had a diversity of different communities to create a kind of set of model plans to demonstrate what energy planning looks like at the local level. Next slide, please. We had some high-level project goals. First was to develop local priorities when it comes to energy. Local governments traditionally haven't been considering energy in their planning the same way that they consider transportation or housing or those more traditional topics that go into a comprehensive plan. And because communities have not spent a lot of time thinking about energy, we don't really know what their priorities are. They don't know what their priorities are. So key to this initiative was teasing out those local priorities and understanding them better. We wanted to develop ways that local communities can participate in the energy discussion. Energy decisions are made primarily at the state level and by utilities. And it's that interaction between PUCO and the different utilities active in the state, and local communities, local governments have largely been left out of that discussion. And then we want to demonstrate the value of doing energy planning. So, show what the benefits are for a local government to consider energy when doing it, updating their comprehensive plan. And finally, we wanted to uncover ways that OKI can help advance local and regional priorities. So what are those common ideas and threads that go into the energy discussion that we make more sense to be addressed at a regional level? Next slide, please. So what does energy planning look like? We talked about, three kind of key questions. How does energy intersect with other local government functions? How does energy affect residents and businesses of a community? And then asking the local government to set goals and objectives around the energy discussion. How does the local government want to get involved with energy in the community? Next slide. And click one more. The energy, next slide. The energy doesn't exist in a vacuum. What we found in doing this project is there's a lot of ways that energy, the topic of energy, intersects with the more traditional topics in a comprehensive plan, like land use and transportation, social equity, economic development, and the provision of community services. So when doing this, when doing energy planning, it really fits in well within the context of a comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just quickly run through a couple of different topics that came out of the planning process. One being local governments use energy and how they use energy, what types of energy they use, and being more efficient with the energy that they use is a key driver for local government decisions. How can they move to cleaner energy? How can local governments move to using less energy or being more efficient? Next slide. And one of the key things that kind of surprised me was how much energy goes into streetlights. For most of the local governments that we worked with, near half of their energy spending was to power streetlights. And most of the streetlights are using technology that's 60, 70 years old, and if inefficient. So converting streetlights to LED was one of the more popular initiatives that came out of the planning process. Next slide. Also looking at building stock and the energy efficiency of building stock in the community. Next slide. Energy burden was a key topic that we talked about. The energy burden is the amount of household income dedicated to paying for energy. And we looked at the distribution of energy burden within the different communities that we looked at. You can see the map of Coleraine Township on the right, mapping out which census blocks were disproportionately spending more of their income on energy versus which ones were spending less, lower percentage of their income on energy. And looking at the intersection of, where do these patterns match up with low income households, minority households, elderly households, or our traditional environmental justice groups. Next slide. Urban heat island. I don't have a whole lot of time to go into this, but looking at how the percentage of tree cover in a community affects urban heat islands effects, and especially in areas with large buildings, large open parking lots, etc. Next slide. And then how land use development can affect energy use. So the patterns of new development can greatly impact how much energy it would be consumed in a community in the future. Next slide. And that's not just for urban, that's also for rural communities. So the conservation development shown there, developing less of the site, you're putting less infrastructure and asphalt on the ground in the streets, and a lower percentage of the site is kept in lawns, which is also a high energy. Taking care of lawns uses up a lot of energy. Next slide, please. Lastly, I want to point out that we also gave each community funds to begin implementation of their plans. So we distributed about $132,000, which leveraged nearly $500,000 of improvements and resulted in significant annual savings in both electricity, natural gas, and gallons of fuel used by the 8 communities that we worked with. Next slide. And you can find out more about this project at the project's website. It's energy.oki.org. And find out, you can view all those plans, and as well as tips for creating your own community's energy plan. So with that, I will turn it over to Margaret.
Hi, thanks, Andy, and thanks, Savannah. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. I just want to go over real quickly the tool that we've developed and just a little bit of background on it. One of the things that's an issue with OKI is that we're trying to understand, and we are federally mandated to address the mitigation needs for the region as it relates to transportation projects. So just an overview, when about environmental and compensatory mitigation. This happens whenever there's an unavoidable impact due to development. So this could be transportation as well as anything else. So basically, whenever there is this impact, the developer is required to mitigate some other area to offset the impact done. So this can include stream, wetland, species, or habitat mitigation. And so basically when the mitigation is required, the site being restored may or may not be located in close proximity to where the impact happened. And this is called exportation of mitigation. So if you can see on the map on the right there, there's a boundary of the OKI 8-county region, and the polygons that are multicolored, those indicate all the areas that are considered service areas. So when an impact happens in one service area, the resulting mitigation has to be in the in the very same area. But that still gives a lot of leeway to export out the mitigation to other parts that are not part of OKI. And at OKI, it was addressed as this was indicated as a felt need that we needed to provide some tools to help those involved with mitigation to find potential projects within the OKI region, so that those mitigation investments weren't leaving our region. So you can go on the next slide. Because everyone had different needs, wetland, stream, habitat, conservation versus restoration sites, we had to kind of try to figure out what we needed in this model. And so we worked with in lieu fee providers, local partners, and state partners to just try to find out, and everybody has different ideas. So go ahead to the next slide. So we found out what kind of layers needed to be included in the model. And some of these layers were OKI layers, and some were state layers that we compiled together. We have USDA layers, EPA, some federal EJ screen, environmental justice screen, and then many other different layers. You can go on to the next one. So we decided to do what we call a suitability model. And what that does is it overlays each GIS layer on top of each other, and then does a calculation based on the priorities that you come up with. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play on that, and I'll just I'll walk you through the process. So this is our main screen on our suitability modeler. There's story maps available, and then you can view the modeler. The story maps give you more documentation for you to help get you acquainted. Again, those documents are also available as training tab. And these are all the layers that are available, 21 layers. And if you want to just visualize to see what they look like, you can turn them on and off and select. And then there's boundary layers that are really useful for analysis later on. For this model, we're going to go ahead and just put on jurisdictions, because we'll do something later on with it. This is a tab that gives you information on those layers. It's kind of like a light metadata on each layer, so you can kind of get an idea where it came from. Then you have the ability to add your own data to this map. So if you have anything on ARC Online, or you want to just pull anything from Esri, if you have REST services, you can add those. You can add shape files and other file formats to your map as well. So other features on here, you do have the ability to zoom in and out, as well as change your base map. So we're going to go into a model. So I'm running a model right now that's going to look at canopy height, and it's going to look at low income populations, and it's going to look at minority populations. And these are all from the EJ screen. So I go ahead and I hit the model. I need to make everything equal 100. So I've got 40, 30, and I'm going to put 30 on low income. And then I need to assign, so I weight those layers relative to each other. Then the next thing I need to do is assign the values in each layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is where I open it up, and I'm interested in areas of low canopy cover because I'm looking for areas that might have urban heat island effect. So then I'm going to take the areas that have high or very high canopy cover, and I will weight those lower. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm looking at areas that have greater than 50% low income population, and then I weight those higher. And then higher minority populations, I weight higher than less than average minority populations. Then I go ahead, I run my model, and it shows the hotspots that are most representative of the layers that I put into the map. So these red areas are showing areas that were low income, high minority population, and low tree canopy cover can converge together. And so that gives us some ideas of areas where we might be interested in tree planting programs or looking for urban heat island effect. One of the cool tools that I really like about this, well, first of all, let me start off by doing this. I want to be able to see what's underneath that layer. And right now it just shows up. So I'm going to go ahead and add a transparency just so I can see a little better what's underneath. I can see the names. And then I'm actually going to change so I can act. Am I going to change? Okay, yeah, I am going to change this to change it to an aerial. And so then I can kind of see what's underneath the lay of the land, so to speak. So one last thing I want to show here is the tool, the charting tool. So with this charting tool, I can draw an area, which is really neat. I can, and it will spit up a graph for me of what percentage of that area is each category, either low, medium, high, very high, relative to my model that I've created. So in this one, I'm just going to look at jurisdictions. And so I have that jurisdiction layer loaded up so I can actually compare jurisdictions to each other if I want. So I can look at this one area and it'll give me the percentages, and I can compare different different jurisdictions just to see where they stand relative to that model I created. And that pretty much in a nutshell is what I have to show. We have had, we have had a lot of use cases, and I'm going to be, and it's, we just released the model, so we're hoping to, we're hoping to have a lot more use cases in the future. So anyway, that's, that's pretty much our tool, and I look forward to anyone using it. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to run you through and give you an even more details on how to use it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andy and Margaret. Just really great examples of how to incorporate climate and equity concepts into planning work. I can't wait I haven't used the tool myself yet, but I need to build in some time to begin tinkering around with it. And I can say firsthand, I've interacted with many of the jurisdictions that participated in the energy planning program. And they've had nothing but amazing things to say about how it's supported their progress to date. So to wrap up today, we just wanted to share some next steps and some save the dates for y'all to keep engaged. So this webinar series does continue through July until the launch of our Regional Climate Collaborative. Our next session for this series will be on June 29th. So you will receive that update in your email when we follow up with this webinar. And before then, we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to attend our Midwest Regional Sustainability Summit next week. You can see here on the right that we have a very exciting keynote speaker, Kristen Baja from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And we'll also be hosting a plenary with the mayors of Cincinnati, Dayton, and Lima, Ohio. And we have tons of sessions dedicated to equity and climate. And one of the sessions is actually hosted by Margaret that will be digging in even deeper on this tool and how communities have leveraged it. So please join us next week. I'll drop the link in our email for how to register and attend. And last but not least, next week, we will also be announcing our July 21st event for the Regional Climate Collaborative launch. There will be an afternoon virtual event for you to engage with leaders from across the country on how regional climate action has played out in different regions elsewhere and what it will mean for Greater Cincinnati. There will be an interactive element so we can hear from you, and you'll hear about next steps of what is a regional climate collaborative and what will it mean for local governments and their staff, including planners. And then we'll also be hosting green drinks that same evening for a little in-person fun to talk about regional climate action. And so you'll hear updates about that next week when we announce these events. And so with that, I'll wrap up our webinar, but I know we've got some questions in the chat that I'm happy to address, and feel free to stick around until 1. We'll be here to answer any questions. Great. So our first question comes from Ashley. And Margaret, this one is for you. Did you say the variables you're testing for are by block groups, or tracks?
Okay, so one of the things for a suitability model is it works on raster features. So what we have to do is we have to take our vector layers, which would be the blocks or block groups or tracks, and then we have to convert them into raster format. There's a little bit of magic involved with that because you want to have, it basically takes it from the lines or the polygons and makes it into a grid. So you want the grid to still look like what it's supposed to look like, but you want the grid blocks to be big enough that will run that'll run real well in a model online. So so we started off with block group data because that's the unit that we were able to get for the for EJ data, and then from there we had to rasterize it so it could be included into the model. So it's based on blocks, but it's not identifiable as blocks because it's been rasterized. Or in block groups, but no, it's been rasterized from block groups.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to tack on a follow-up question to that just because I'm curious. I know you all recently hosted an event in Butler County, and I'm just curious who all is using this tool, who's showing up to your events, and if you have any examples of how communities or organizations leverage your tool so far. What are some kind of concrete examples of how this tool has changed action in Greater Cincinnati?
Okay, well, one of the ways it has been used, it was used to determine focus areas for tree planting for taking root. So they were able to do a similar analysis to what I just showed you and identify areas that the communities that they wanted to focus on for their tree planting. So there's one example. Another one is it was used for an in lieu fee program. And that in lieu fee program helped to spec out potential sites for mitigation restoration. So they were looking for large scale stream restoration projects. And they, I'm not going to give you too many details because somebody's, there's negotiations going on, but they were able to identify several different sites, 300 acres or more, that would be appropriate for this, for a stream restoration project. Then it was also used for, it's been being used by land trusts that's helping to identify which areas are priority areas for them to conserve. So it's being used for tree plantings in communities, restoration projects, conservation projects, and it was also used by Boone County Conservation District to pick out their survey plots for a bat survey. So they wanted to find areas where they would expect to find bats and where that were accessible so that they could set up their subacoustic monitoring.
Excellent. That is so cool just to hear how it's already changing action on the ground. And I'll encourage, feel free to drop questions in the chat, everyone. Or if you want to come off mute and use your voice, feel free to unmute and ask a question as well. I'll share that Dana from Norwood has shared that she's looking forward to using this tool in Norwood and seems like a great way to ID neighborhoods for the Climate Safe Neighborhoods program. I'm glad you drew that connection, Dana. Yeah, we have had the pleasure of interfacing with OKI as well as the American Planning Association through the Climate Safe Neighborhoods program so far. Last fall, we actually co-hosted a planning event where we brought in regional planners. Andy led that event and brought in planners from across the region to engage in Bond Hill and Roselawn. And we hope to be able to use more OKI tools and co-host more events with planners, because I think that was a really productive collaboration. So Andy, I also was curious because I know climate and equity was sort of a theme of our Climate Safe Neighborhoods program. Can you share a bit more about how the energy burden element of the plan program that you had, did all neighborhoods incorporate that type of planning into their participation in this program? And how have you seen some of these communities leverage not only the energy burden piece, but have you had further conversations with yeah, kind of energy equity programming that might be in the pipeline?
Right. So yeah, we did that energy burden analysis for each of the communities based on census block groups. For some of the more rural communities, Harlan Township comes to mind. Their rural township in Warren County. They only had 3 census block groups in the township, just with their low population. But with most communities, and I showed the example of Coleraine Township, you could really see the stratification, which areas of the community were disproportionately affected by high energy burdens. And like I mentioned, we overlaid that impact with different environmental justice groups, minority, low-income households, and elderly, to identify groups within the community that were being disproportionately impacted. Now, to address the second part of the question is how communities can address energy burden. That's a lot trickier. Addressing it from the side of or the energy side of the equation. A lot of communities have in Ohio have what's the term I'm looking for? It deals with energy companies for the residents that lower the cost of energy, particularly electricity and natural gas. So they're addressing the cost of energy. Energy efficiency is really difficult to address. Pretty much all of our energy efficiency programs are targeted towards homeowners and are coming in the form of rebate programs. So you have to own your own home and you have to have the ability to pay for the improvement up front and then wait for a tax incentive or a rebate from the utility company. That leaves a large number of people out of the running for those incentives. And therefore, what we've seen is a lot of the energy efficiency improvements in homes and building stock has gone to higher income homeowners. So what communities can do, there's different ways to target renters. So targeting, landlords, trying to incentivize improvements in rental properties, and targeting low income homeowners with improvements. It is very difficult because you need a very high level of incentive to get those housing units improved. So it's not, there isn't that kind of, high level of improvement for lower costs like you get with the rebate programs that have been more typical. City of Cincinnati is doing some things, and yes, I'm reading in the comments.
I just shared the link to the city program because I figured that was the direction you were going in.
Yes. So the city of Cincinnati has been piloting programs to reach rental homeowners or rental properties to encourage energy and efficient improvements, and people working cooperatively has been doing a program targeting low-income householders. I think below 50% LMI, and that isn't a rebate program. That is where people working cooperatively goes in and assesses the situation and does the improvements for little to no cost.
Yeah, I think it's exciting to, we have some local examples of governments being able to take this information, this understanding of what's the lay of the land in terms of not only energy burden, but all these other factors, and then create targeted programming to serve communities who have historically been divested from and underserved. And so looks like we have another question here. Did community residents show any interest or existing knowledge around community solar, or maybe specifically solar on brownfield or blighted properties? So I guess that's through the energy programming that you went through, Andy. Was that ever part of the conversation?
We did have a community looking at installing solar or using a brownfield property for a solar installation. That wasn't something that we could go too far in with the energy planning project, because one of the stipulations on the grant was we could not directly address solar. It was just a string attached to the funding. So we got that community kind of did some work on the side to help point them in the right direction. It didn't come to fruition, but we also have, I've heard of several communities looking to install solar on municipal property. Village of Indian Hill is looking at solar. Loveland is installing solar on a service garage. Well, the city of Cincinnati has contracted with a solar farm and has made huge investments in solar at a different scale than most of the other local governments around have been doing. Center for Local Government last fall was organizing a group buy with their members for solar, kind of like a group solar purchase, but for local governments instead of homeowners.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We actually featured of that program that is in progress right now on our blog last quarter. So I just dropped in that blog to the chat. Thank you for elaborating on that, Andy. While we wait for any additional questions to come in from the audience, I thought it would also be helpful if both you, Margaret, and Andy could share. I mean, what you shared today was just a slice of what OKI does in terms of tools and programming. And I was just wondering if there are any other tools or programs you would call out for not only planners on the line, but this will be up on YouTube later. So what types of resources from OK you would also recommend to folks who tune in?
I would definitely look at the Maps and Apps tab on our website. There are so many web apps that have been developed, GIS-based apps that are pretty phenomenal. One of the ones that comes to mind is the Tree for Me tool, and that one will allow you to basically click on your location and kind of place a tree, and then get some information about the benefits, put in a few details about the tree, and then get some information about the benefits of that tree in your yard, like what kind of, what are your benefits in terms of carbon and stormwater and all other features. And this is all coming from iTree tool. And so it's a really neat thing that was developed in the past. I think it was about a year old. And so that one I definitely would take a look at. I also, the My Communities Water tool, it has some information on communities based on watersheds and really gives you some, so it kind of helps to convey those differences that, jurisdictions don't always, don't follow watersheds. And so, and so you can kind of look at your community and see what the watershed situation looks like there. So I think that's a great one. Andy, you want to talk about some of the ones you
Sure.
have?
Yeah, I'll mention, since we just finished up talking about solar, our Solar Ready viewer on the Maps and Apps tab. You can go in and assess the solar potential of any rooftop in the OKI region, and look at, what are the areas of the roof that are most conducive to housing solar panels, what the potential power generation of those solar panels are, and how much of an offset that would be to your annual utility bill or electricity bill. And that's available for any home, business, any building in the OKI region. If it's a newer home, built in the last few years, you can draw a polygon over top of where that home is, and it'll assess, the area of that polygon. So it's really cool. It takes into account surrounding trees and topography, so it is pretty reasonably accurate, and it's a good first step for for people considering solar.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that we could share just a bit more about the plethora of tools you all have available. I know I get lost in your maps and apps section sometimes, just because there's so much fun stuff to go through. We had another question come in. The question is, what is our risk of maxing out our energy capacity in summer? So you know, is there any potential for triggering rolling blackouts like out west? And I'm happy to just sort of tackle that from my awareness of sort of like the grid operation in our region. And then I don't know, Andy, if you have any sort of comments on sort of the implications or what local planners can do on that topic. I know that, so in our region, at least in Greater Cincinnati, most communities are part of PJM, which is our grid operator, and they have indicated that the region is poised to handle what is expected to be a very hot summer without electric blackouts or brownouts. What I will add, though, for any other Midwestern communities that are listening, is that right next to us, so in Indiana, for example, their grid operator is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, and they have issued a warning for their north and central regions of their coverage area. So that would include a lot of the Midwestern parts of their territory. They have warned of a potential capacity shortfall and other reliability concerns. And so that's just sort of the projection. I think understanding, you know, what grid operation area are you in, and looking up their reliability updates is a helpful way to be aware of what to expect. And I don't know if you would add anything from a planner and energy planning perspective, Andy, as well.
Yeah, I mean, kind of from a macro perspective, you know, over the past 10 years, the largest energy capacity increase in energy generation capacity has not been the creation of new power plants, but actually it has been the increase in energy efficiency of our building stock. So we've been reducing our energy use faster than we've been building our urban environments over the past 10 years. So while we have more buildings, more built space, we've been actually reducing our need for energy that way. Now, as we shift to electric vehicles and the charging requirements required that way, that may change. But it doesn't appear that it will change to the point that we will run out of generation capacity at the macro level, you know, as a country.
Great, thank you for that elaboration. Are there any other questions from our audience members? If not, I'll just leave the last few minutes if Margaret and Andy, there's anything you would want to just add as final thoughts before we wrap up.
For me, it's, you know, once you get something done like what I just did, you get to pause for a moment and showcase it, and then you have to turn around and start redoing it, because that's, you know, that's how it works. So we are starting. So as you start to use the tool, if you think there's layers that, you know, would be better to be included, or some functionality, you know, please reach out to me and let me know, because I'm at that stage right now where I'm kind of making my wish list for what the next version is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, similar to that, you know, the community energy planning project really opened the doors at least for OKI, to be involved in the more involved in the energy space and conversations regionally. And it's exciting to begin, collaborating with, the Climate Safe Neighborhoods program, projects that different local communities are doing. Our Soul Smart, our regional Soul Smart designation that we received last year, and the workshops that we've been doing over the past year has really picked up the conversation locally with solar development, both private sector and public sector, with local governments getting on board. So it's exciting to see all of these things moving in the same direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, some great momentum, both for, actionable steps that planners can take now, and then just seems like a groundswell of activity that people can plug in as these efforts continue. So thank you so much, Margaret and Andy, for joining today. We really appreciated your expertise, and we look forward to collaborating with you on future initiatives, and see you next week at the conference. And thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you.